Welcome to this tutorial on drawing and quilting a wreath. A wreath consists of an outside element and an inside element. Wreaths are found in all kinds of styles of quilting. But most famous for a wreath is the feather style. In this tutorial, I will explain the so-called longarm feathers. These feathers are constructed out of singular shapes. These teardrop shapes are separate. They do not touch. There's a little bit of room between each petal or each feather. I will explain to you how to construct your wreath. I will begin with the outside shape, the outer ring. As you can see in my example, I need a few helper lines. I need some guidelines. Depending on the size of your square or circle area, you may need more or less of these guidelines. Let's look at this example. We see that each petal has a separate space. It has a separate area. So each feather has its own designated area. All of these are exactly the same, at least in my drawing. In your stitching, it might be a little bit different from petal to petal, from feather to feather. Don't worry about it too much. A little bit of variation is okay. Just try to find a similar shape. How do you do that? Let's analyze this example. Our petal shape starts at an intersection between the circle lines and the diagonal lines. Then the wreath moves to the right in this instance. But again, that is a preference. You can, of course, go the other way. But in my examples, I'm going clockwise. From that intersection, I'm going to travel along my circle line. Once I come close to the next intersection, my line moves upwards. You may notice that my petal or feather hits the side of my area. For each of the feather shapes, or the teardrops, or whatever you want to call them, we are going to stick to the rule that we're going to try and hit the side of the area about this high. If you want to, you can add another circle line as a reference, but that is up to you. So we hit the side of our designated area and we're moving upwards. Now that we are at the top of our designated area, we are moving downwards again. We are aiming for our starting point. This teardrop shape will be repeated over and over again. The teardrop shape is so constructed that the area that we do not use, this area, is bigger than the area that we do occupy. This is important because each shape will be placed next to the previous one. Once you have completed the first petal or feather, we are moving along the same circle line like we did before. We are moving along until we hit the next cross section. This will be our next starting point. Let's think about it. What did we do? We travel along our circle until we come close to the second reference mark. We move upwards up to the mark that we have decided on. We move upwards towards the top of our area, and we move down towards our starting point. So now we can continue. Let's move on towards our next mark. Go up, the top, and down. Let's look at it without the other example. Let's do this ourselves. So, moving along the circle towards our next reference mark, move upwards to the top, move backwards. Move along the circle to our next reference mark, move up, top, and back. You see in my example that all of my feathers are a little bit different. But because they are occupying the similar shapes, the reference areas, it is okay. Try to keep the distance between these petals very similar as well. So these, try and keep them the same or as similar as possible. You continue along our wreath clockwise until you reach the last one. If everything has gone well, your last one will fit within the empty space. And you have enclosed your whole wreath. It is now time to consider adding an inner shape, inner circle, also moving clockwise. So the reference lines, our guidelines, are the same ones as the ones that we used for the outside. This is just a preference. If you feel like that the inner wreath is a little bit too tight, you might want to lower the amount of reference lines. Okay, let's analyze the inner shape before we start drawing. Our shapes, our teardrops, they look a little bit different than the ones on the outside. First of all, they are a little bit longer and a little bit more narrow. And the most important difference is that they do not taper down as much. This is what I mean. Our outer petals are wider at the top than at the beginning. Our inner petals are very similar for a long area, so they don't taper down. We start at the same mark as we did before. It's just easy. We move outwards towards the circle, that is our guide, and I try to come out of it a bit and come back within the designated area. This is a different technique than what I told you about when we did the outside. With the outside, remember, we moved up, stayed within this area, and stayed within the circle. So instead of trying to stay within the designated area, I'm allowing myself to go outside a bit. It is just a preference. You can experiment with these techniques, or you can also vary the amount of areas that you are occupying. We're moving back to where we came from. You can travel all the way back to your starting point, but because you have already stitched out the outer shape, there is already a line there. There is stitching there. So there is not really a need to move all the way back. It is now time to start the second petal or feather. We're trying to keep a little bit of a distance between my last feather and my next one. Once I get close to the inner circle, I create my little arc, try to hit my mark, and come back. It is just like merging on a motorway. Your line needs to merge with the inner circle. Travel along the circle line, move upwards towards the line, and arc, and move back down. Now, this is what that looks like if you start, without the example there. We're moving along our circle line, keep a bit of a distance, do my arc, and try to move back to where I came from. Back out again, little arc, come back, etc., etc. So move along. Your last petal will fit right in the area that is left open. I want to show you the option of using less reference marks in the inner circle. So instead of using the lines that we used for the outer shape, we are creating new reference marks for the inner circle. Here it is. What is different? Well, instead of having a quadrant divided into 4 segments, I now have it divided into 3 segments. The result of that is that my inner wreath looks more proportional to my outer wreath. Here you see the example that I showed you before. And this is the example where the inner wreath, the inner petals, use a different reference set. It is up to you to decide if you want to have a more classical shape or something more modern. I would love to see what you come up with. You can leave a comment on my YouTube channel. You can leave a comment on my blog. Or you could leave me something on my Instagram account. You can tag me. I always use the handle eye patch and quilt.